Right then, it's time to talk about that or those Jim Ratcliffe interviews that have come out over the last 24 hours or so. I'm a little bit late to these, I've got to be honest, but I thought I would have a bit of time today to get this one out nice and early in the morning. And then Manchester United announced, and Jim Ratcliffe stood up there and announced that they were building a 100,000 seater new stadium, a new Old Trafford, a move away from the current ground. Built within 5 years, potentially. We'll see how that goes. I also did do an episode on that. Go and subscribe on the audio platforms to the Promised Land of Manchester United podcast. If you've not heard it already, it's available on Apple and Spotify. But here, now, I'm going to talk about the things that Jim Ratcliffe has been saying in public about the team, about Ruben Amorim, about the players, about the financial problems, lots of stuff, not all of it popular, but I think he's willing to be unpopular. And subscribe to this YouTube channel as well. Get your comments below on this video, like the video, and let me know what you think about what Jim Ratcliffe has been saying. Please follow me on social media as well at @Scott Saunders, and subscribe on those audio platforms I just mentioned as well. But look, so much to talk about, and I'm just going to outline my thoughts initially on doing these interviews in the first place, because obviously there were protests that happened at Old Trafford at the weekend for the Arsenal game, and whether they had any correlation to the fact that Jim Ratcliffe has taken these interviews, I would guess not really, given we have now seen that the announcement of the stadium has been made on Tuesday morning. So maybe there's some media relations and planning there ahead of that moment, and to make sure that the media get a good eye before everything was announced. But look, I think fans and everybody has been asking for 20 years for public communication from the people who are running Manchester United. This is common with lots of football clubs as well. There has not been a lot of communication publicly from the top at a lot of football clubs, and it's caused football clubs a lot of problems. Certainly with Manchester United, the Glazer family have never, ever really communicated their intentions with Manchester United, although they have had people working for them in the past that have essentially communicated that they were looking to get Manchester United into the Champions League, to make money, to keep things ticking over, with no real ambition or stated ambition of wanting to win titles and wanting to be the best club in the world. And look, there will be parts of this where I criticize Sir Jim Ratcliffe for him. Look, he's not careful, is he? He's really not careful. He tends not to give a damn about PR. I think that's something that I'll touch on over the course of this. I think that's been a pattern that's been established for well over a year now. He doesn't really worry about what he's saying and how it reflects on him. I think he did allude to in these interviews that he likes to pick up a paper and eat a croissant in the morning, but it's not been so easy for him to do that over the course of the last year, given all the criticism that he's been getting. But he is happy or prepared to be that unpopular figure if it means turning Manchester United around. And my first point on this is that I prefer personally, and I think it is a good thing, and I think this is shared with a lot of United fans as well, it's a good thing that he is sitting down and communicating. Now, he has said in, I can't remember which part of the interview it was, but he's spoken to the written press, he's spoken to the BBC, spoke to Gary Neville on the overlap as well. And lots and lots of communication. And I think it was Matt Lawton, actually, who said on TalkSport that Jim Ratcliffe has done these interviews and has not had any say over copy, no limitations on copy. They have been able to take everything verbatim and write it down. And now, usually, like with my experience doing interviews in the past with players, with managers, or anybody who's trying to create or protect their public image, usually there's a process there that goes from you do the interview, you send a version of the interview back to the representatives or to the agency or whatever, and there's usually some tweaks which go through, and there has to be some. It depends how hard-headed you are as a member of the press, and how you want. If you want to protect relationships, this kind of thing, then generally there's a two-way street, and both sides have got to be happy with what's going out there. But Jim Ratcliffe has made sure, and this is confirmed by one of the journalists who was speaking to him in London on Monday. Jim Ratcliffe has essentially said, no, don't worry about it. You can take everything that I have written and you can do whatever you want with it. I will not care. I don't care about the copy. Put it out there. And that there is something which A, shows me that he doesn't give a damn about the PR, but B, I think he believes in what he wants to do. He believes in the plan that he has put forward, and he's taking public ownership over it, and he's taking flack for it, and is willing to stand up there or sit there and explain decisions that he's made, even if they were the wrong ones. And I think that is something that you have to, regardless of where you sit on the spectrum of if whether you're an Ineos supporter or whether you're not, or whether you're a Jim Ratcliffe supporter or whether you're not, the fact that he is sitting down with noted journalists, with Gary Neville, and essentially holding his hands up to errors and expecting negative reaction, but actually sitting there and explaining so fans can understand what's happening, and so people who've worked at the club so can understand what's happening. I think that takes a fair bit of balls, to be honest, to be able to do that. And I think, look, this is a guy who's in his 70s. He's very, very experienced and successful in business. And I think when you have that kind of belief in yourself, you back yourself. And I think he wouldn't have got to the position that he's in if he wasn't willing to be unpopular and he wasn't necessarily confident in the decisions that he was making. So that's the first point that I wanted to make. There's some other points as well. Look, there's so much negative reaction to this from, and he hasn't helped himself in moments. He hasn't. Plenty of negative reaction on some of the things that he said, and United would have gone bust if I hadn't have stepped in, and that's people have taken that literally and then gone, well, actually they wouldn't have gone bust, would they? But I think he might have been talking about the cash position, which is quite. It's been reported recently quite a lot that United's cash position was around 15 million quid or something like that, and now it's somewhere around 90 million quid after he put money in. He said that money's essentially all gone already, but I don't think he literally means that United would have gone bust. I think maybe he did. I don't know. But I think you're right to point out that they actually wouldn't have. But I think at the same time, there's a habit of taking things very, very literally. And you know the point he was trying to make. And I think that is what I'm going to try and do here. I'm going to try and understand some of the things that he said, look into the meanings of them. Is he speaking that literally? Does he actually mean this? And look, there's lots and lots of things to take care of throughout this podcast, which I don't know how long this is going to be, but I'm just spitballing off some of the stuff that he has already said. And I'll get through my notes. I've got Ruben Amorim. I've got some quotes on Ashworth and Eric Ten Hag. I've got the talk about players who United are still paying for, the run out of cash line that I said earlier on. All of this stuff is going to be covered in this podcast, so stick with me. I will talk first, though, about the Glazer comments, because Gary Neville, fair play to him, I think Gary Neville has been accused a lot of, towing the line of the club. And like some people see him that way. Other people see him as just a constant critic of Manchester United as well. And I can see both sides of that. I don't think United fans are too hot on him at the moment, but Gary Neville did sit down with him and did challenge him on the Glazer ownership and the fact that the Glazers have not put a penny of their own money into this football club and have instead leveraged it with debt over the course of the last 20 years, which has gotten them to the point, or is a massive contributing factor to where they are at this moment in time. And I think Neville deserves to get plaudits for how he asked those questions and how he pressed Jim Ratcliffe on this situation. But I think you also got to bear in mind as well something that I'll explain in a second. But Ratcliffe has said it's not the solution to keep throwing money at the problem. You've got to get your house in order. If you look at the reason the debt is at the level at the moment, that's because that's increased by 330 million in the last 4 years because the club's been spending so much more than it's earning. If you look at some of the other characters in English football that are owners, and you know them very well, they're heavily involved in all the running of the club. The Glazers, gave management an awful lot of rope, too much rope, obviously, but the previous two teams of management have had to take a lot of the blame for the decisions they made. They have to, I'm afraid. It's not just the Glazer family. They've not been involved in a level of detail. And look, I think we are all critical, and we should be critical, of a number of things about the Glazer family, and this will never change. They, as well as everything in terms of loading the club with debt, That is obviously a massive, massive problem. I say on this podcast frequently that the Glazers have been so hands off in that aspect that they have also employed people like Ed Woodward and Richard Arnold. I'm guessing he's talking about here as well. Those kinds of people have been put in massively important positions within the football club over the course of that time where the Glazer family were in charge, but no Sir Alex Ferguson, no David Gill. They have been the ones making those decisions, and they have got the decisions wrong. They have not been football people. The football team has suffered as a result of that. They've been commercial heads, they've been bankers. And what Jim Ratcliffe has done here is essentially point the finger at essentially those people and has tried, and I can understand why he's getting criticism for this, but I do have an explanation for it. And in my opinion, he has tried to essentially deflect away from the Glazers as being one of the big faults in this. And that's not obviously not gone down well. But I think if you do remember back in December 2023, and I think I'm pretty confident that this is a thing that exists. The two parties, when this transaction happened, I believe signed a non-disparagement clause about the other party. So you've got to bear in mind that Jim Ratcliffe can't just go out there, given he works with the Glazers each day, or maybe he doesn't. I don't really know the inner workings of this, but at the end of the day, there's a co-owner and there's a co-owner. They have different shares of the football club, different amounts of shares of the football club, but Jim Ratcliffe is the one controlling the football operation now, and he's making these decisions because of that. But he cannot, as far as I'm aware, he cannot just come out and say, yeah, the Glazers have loaded this club with debt, and therefore, and this is a strain, and I need to get rid of it as quickly as possible. Because he's essentially admitting and disparaging the co-owner there. And I don't think he's able to do that. So just, if you're wasn't aware that that was a thing, it most likely is. And you can see why in that sense that he's been deflecting blame away from the Glazers and instead pointing at the likes of Ed Woodward and Richard Arnold as being the ones at fault for the club's cash position at the moment and the club's difficulties financially. But obviously, like, I will say this as well. The Glazers are responsible for putting those people in charge of the football operation. So, look, you got to keep in mind that he probably can't go as deep as in on it and in on the Glazers as many people would want to. But that's probably down to the agreements that have been signed over the course of this takeover process. And Jim Ratcliffe is the one now fronting up and taking a lot of the heat and taking the responsibility of turning this club around while the Glazers sit over in Florida and continue to just sit there silently and hoping for the next payday. I hate it. Everybody hates it. But at the same time, you kind of have to understand that not everything is played out publicly. And if you're frustrated with Ratcliffe for reasons like that, I am too, of course. But you have to get it. Like, he can't just come out and say all of these things that everybody wants him to say about the Glazer family because he's in business with them, and there's probably some countersigned documents that mean that they can't talk about each other in that kind of way. So, look, that is an important thing to establish. That's an important thing to say, and it's an important thing to understand as well. So you can, there's plenty of things that I will look at Jim Ratcliffe for and talk about here that he probably shouldn't have said, but at the same time, I don't think he cares all that much. So just touching on that run out of cash quote again, he said, Manchester United would have run out of cash by the end of this year, by the end of 2025, after having me put $300 million in. And if we buy no new players in the summer, we're in the process of change and it's an uncomfortable period and disruptive. And I do feel sympathy with the fans. The simple answer is the club runs out of money at Christmas if we don't do these things. He's talking about the redundancies, the cost cutting measures, and lots of stuff like that. There was a moment where I think, and fair play to Gary Neville again, he caught Jim Ratcliffe out in suggesting that why couldn't United have done a charity night in order to raise money that United have ended up cutting in order to support former players of the football club. That is something that Jim Ratcliffe then admitted, I probably would have considered that if somebody had told me, and nobody did. And Neville, fair play to him, he did go in and he said, why haven't you got people around you saying that this was a possible thing? And maybe that changes something in the future. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure of where that stands at the moment. But I think that the general point here is Jim Ratcliffe and the people in charge of the football club who are trying to make this a profitable football club again, have looked at the overall operation and looked at the operating costs and have decided to make really, really brutal changes and cuts in order to turn the club profitable again. And this is the stuff that they can control. This is the stuff that they can project. Whereas with the football team, there's qualification for the Champions League, non-qualification for the Champions League, all dependent on how a season goes. So it's all variable, all interchangeable. So they have looked at the controllables and the costs that they can control, and have got them down to a point where they feel like the club can run leanly. And that's not a popular thing to say. It's not a decision that is popular. It's affected real people, and that's really, really sad. He said here, the club had got bloated, so we reduced that, and we will finish with a lean and efficient organization. That's how we will address the cost. The player decisions will all be focused on how we are going to improve performance. That's also, he did also there say, when he was asked about whether the likes of Garnacho and Kobe Mainoo would be sold, if they are sold, if those players are sold, he didn't say that they would need to necessarily, but he did say that if they are sold, then it will be for footballing reasons, not for reasons that I've just outlined there with the needs to cut. So I have referenced how United might need to raise that kind of money because of the financial position by sales like that over the course of the last few weeks. He's essentially said that they don't necessarily have to do that. And if those decisions are made, then it'll be for footballing reasons. So that's something that is positive, I guess, but I'm not saying at all that important players aren't going to be sold. It's still completely possible. It's just not for the reasons that I think we all thought we'd be seeing in the first place. Now, look, he said this somewhere in one of the interviews. I'm taking this all from different places. He said, my mum used to tell me, take care of the pennies and the pounds take care of themselves. And I think that is the approach that he's taking here. It's again, nobody likes billionaires, really, do they? It's not a popular approach, but I think he's trying to, and the company have been, the people who've been doing this have been trying to install that kind of mantra within the football club so they can converge to profitability. He says he thinks that the club will be the most profitable club in the world in the next 3 years, which is unthinkable at the moment. But, we'll wait and see. There are just a couple of points that I wanted to raise here. He said a moment, there was a point where I think it was in the written pieces in the papers. He said there's a forest of numbers, so that they had a lot of unexpected costs that they had to deal with. A body language consultant was on as much as 175K a year, which is just incredible and crazy, and probably does go to show just how out of control this was. That's crazy. So they have had to deal with costs like that they necessarily didn't expect. And what can you say? What can you say about that kind of thing? Some of the decisions that they made, they have to do. And I have tried to get on the side of trying to understand why all these decisions have been made, even though I know that it's really unfair on the average person over the course of this period where it's been really, really difficult. These guys are running it like a business, and they're trying to get it to run like a business. So Jim Ratcliffe is a businessman, and a business has to be profitable no matter what business it is, whether it's football, whether it's just a general business in any kind of field. They need to be profitable. They need to be making money. And the way that United have been run over the last few years, it just meant that he said 7 years or so that United haven't been profitable. So that's the urgent thing that he has in his mind thought was important to address. I'm not necessarily sticking up for it. I'm just saying I can understand why they've made these kinds of decisions. And I do think that all of these decisions are being made in order to take Manchester United back to a positive place. It's hard to see the wood through the trees at the moment, if that's the phrase, but because they're 15th or 14th in the Premier League. But today, as I record this, they have announced a new 100,000-seater stadium, a regeneration project around the stadium, which is they're hopeful is going to happen at some point soon. They will be interlinked together. There's designs which have been released about the stadium. Omar Barada has been publicly speaking about how Manchester United want to be the best club in the world on and off the pitch, how the football team will be representative of the club that plays in that stadium. They want to establish Manchester United again as the best football club in the world, the best football club in the UK. So I think as much as I think they've always been pretty honest about the stuff that they've been doing. So I have no reason to doubt that those are the motivations behind all the decisions they've been taking. And you at times like this, when you're so lost, and it's so difficult to understand where people are coming from and where United are going, and why United are 15th in the league or 14th in the league. You do kind of have to have a bit of faith, and I think, as I said in the other podcast that I've done on the stadium itself, you just get a feeling that something is different, because we never had communications of desire to win under the previous ownership, and now we've had this at every turn, pretty much every turn. Whether they achieve it in the timeframes that they have, I don't know, but they have at least put down timeframes with desires to reestablish United as a force. And that's an important thing to point out. And I know it's a difficult time for everyone at the moment, and it's hard to understand some of the decisions that they do make, even if it's very small things like taking away lunches for staff. Do they need to do that? Probably not. No, not necessarily. I don't actually think so. But if you come back to this quote of "take care of the pennies and the pounds take care of themselves," it's a culture, and it's a mantra that I think is trying to be established right the way through the club. And the quotes and the jokes are made in comment sections on different posts on different social platforms of, well, you can make all these decisions and yet you still got Casemiro stinking up the place for the most part on 300k a week. They can't do anything about it yet. But if this ruthlessness is there and has been established now through different parts of the club, and Jim Ratcliffe is, as I'm going to talk about next, naming players publicly as overpaid, essentially. Some are not good enough and some are probably overpaid, he said, about the players. And he actually named names. Crazy. You have to think that ruthlessness that has been put through the entire football club and the entire football operation off the pitch over the course of the last few months will happen to the playing staff in the summer. And I'll talk about that in a second. This summer, we will buy Anthony, Sancho, Casemiro, I think he said Martinez, Højlund, and Onana, and they're about 17 million quid each. These are more quotes from Jim Ratcliffe, naming players that Manchester United are still paying for based on transfer decisions that were made by people who were running the football operation before Ineos came in. And I think that he amounted the summer fees in total. Even if United don't buy anyone this summer, they still have to pay £89 million worth of transfer fees this summer in order to pay off transfers that they have already agreed and signed for. And talk about the credit cards that United have had in the past, and United have put certain deals on it, and they pay certain deals in installments because obviously they haven't been in such a fortunate position to be able to pay deals off straight off. You can amortize costs over the course of contracts, but it depends when. That's different from when the actual money goes out of your accounts. It's just an accounting tool. But United are paying for Sancho, Anthony, Casemiro, Martinez, Højlund, and Onana, and they're all about 17 million quid each. He said there, that's what is outstanding. If we buy nobody else, we're buying those players, but it'll be a very profitable club. We believe that in 3 years' time, it'll be the most profitable club in world football, and it will be a very, very different place. But we need to go through the change, and nobody likes change. He said then, some are not good enough. Look, I'm taking quotes from different places here and trying to stagger this podcast and section it and structure it. Some are not good enough, and some are probably overpaid. But for us to mold the squad that we are fully responsible for and accountable for, it will take time. We've got this period of transformation where we move from the past to the future. There are some great players in this squad, as we know. The captain, Bruno Fernandes, is a fabulous footballer. We definitely need Bruno. He's fantastic. And look, this is the first bit where I will say I don't think Sir Jim Ratcliffe has needed to drop names of players, because I think you've seen the headlines. I don't think this is exactly what he has said. Look, maybe I'm wrong here, and maybe he is calling out players that are actually playing for the football club and will play for the football club on Thursday, that play for the football club on Sunday against Arsenal as well. Some are not good enough, and some are probably overpaid. It is damning. It's so damning, and I can't even imagine what it's like as one of those football players having to hear that from your boss in public, your big boss in public, not even Ruben Amorim. What that does to you. Now, you can make some links because he's obviously named. Look, he's Anthony Sancho, and I think he's named Marcus. He didn't name Marcus Rashford. Marcus Rashford is a high earner out on loan as well, and they're still paying money for those players. He said we're paying half of Sancho's wages along those lines as well. But I think naming actually those names like Casemiro and Højlund and Onana coming out of his mouth in the same breath, whether the sentences are related or not, as some are not good enough and some are probably overpaid, as much as probably everybody thinks that that is the case, it's, what's the right word? Erroneous? I don't know. Brutal? Definitely. But maybe look, I do try and get in the heads and the psyche of what these guys are saying and try and see what the perspective is here, rather than just take the approach of going, well, he can't say that, can he? Even though I don't actually think he can say that, and it's probably not the right thing. I think the conclusion is, as I circled back to at the start, I said, I don't think he gives a damn about PR. Remember that report on Casemiro a couple of weeks ago that he wants to stay and he wants to play out the last year of his contract? He's been okay recently. He played really well against Arsenal the other day, actually. But I think I said in that podcast that Ruben Amorim played a very narrow team that's tight together in a low block. And that probably suits Casemiro because he doesn't have as much ground to cover. But that's not how Ruben Amorim wants to play. So whether this is a thinly veiled attempt to make players feel like they're not wanted because they're earning too much money, maybe this is the kind of the kick out the door that he feels is necessary in order to shake things up. Because if there's not, internally anyway, there's not big messages coming through privately, which means that the likes of Casemiro need to leave the club in the summer. Casemiro could well sit on that contract for another year, and I don't think Man United want to pay him that. So I think there has to be some, you have to break some eggs. Maybe this wasn't the right way to do it. And look, I think he probably could have done without saying that, personally. I think that kind of thing, you can say players that are out on loan that you know are going to be sold. Like Sancho is, Chelsea need to finish below 14th in order to not trigger that transfer. So I think you can say that really about Jadon Sancho. He's already said enough as it is when he's on the club's books. Remember that situation with Marcus Rashford recently, the freedom quote. But he doesn't give a damn about PR. If there's anything I've learned over the course of the last year, and again, I was reminded of it during this interview process, he does not give a damn about PR. This is a guy that wants to fix the problem. And he doesn't mind who he upsets. He's probably bound by some legal limitations, as I mentioned earlier about the Glazer family. That's probably one line he can't cross legally. And I think with Ashworth as well, which I'll get to in a little bit, maybe there's something that's been signed there where they're not able to, again, not able to disparage, or he's used the word chemistry with Dan Ashworth. But just back to these players, some are not good enough and are probably overpaid. It's a brutal quote from the guy who is in charge of this football operation to say. Doesn't mean it's not true, because we all know it's true. But he's then also, I'm paraphrasing him here, but he said about Ruben Amorim that Ruben Amorim is without 4 of the club's top 8 highest earners. And with the players that are available to him, I think there's 12, 13 senior players available at the moment, he's actually doing quite a good job. Which, again, people are going to say, well, he's not doing a good job, is he? But equally, if he'd come out and said, I don't think he's doing a very good job, with 15th or 14th in the league, people are going to look at him and say, well, he's not backing Ruben Amorim. Like, the way that the media world is nowadays, you can't win. I think I've had people say he shouldn't have done this interview. Of course he should have. But people want clarity. People want honesty. And people want explanations. And I've seen people say, well, you shouldn't have done anything. I don't know what you prefer, but like, let me know what you think in the comment section or on social media somewhere. It's for me, I think it's important that we have clarity and that we have honesty, even if you don't like it. That's the way I always work. I always prefer you be honest with me to my face. This isn't to your face, obviously, with these other players, but that's the best way to go about things. I prefer honesty out there because Manchester United need to be honest with themselves as well. The only way they're going to fix this and turn around is to be honest with themselves and to make unpopular, really difficult decisions because of the long-term goal. And there is a long-term goal. No matter what you think, there is a long-term goal to get out of this. Whether they hit those goals, I'm not sure. But yeah, anyway, let's talk about. I've got Dan Ashworth and Eric Ten Hag left to do, and then I've got Ruben Amorim. So maybe I'll do Ashworth and Ten Hag first. He's held his hand up, and talking about that honesty, there's some accountability here as well. He has said, when asked about Eric Ten Hag and Dan Ashworth and the decisions to extend or trigger the extension in Ten Hag's contract after United won the FA Cup, and to bring Dan Ashworth in only to then sack him, which has got him a lot of flack given all the losses that United have had. Sacking these two people and coaches as well in Eric Ten Hag's staff has been a massive contributing factor to the losses that they've recently suffered. So he has said, yeah, they were just mistakes. I mean, the Eric thing is slightly mitigating. There was quite a lot of debate about at that time. It wasn't just the FA Cup final. The fans were clearly of the view that we'd like to stick with him and that sort of stuff. But yeah, they were both mistakes. And he essentially said that Omar Barada, CEO, and Jason Wilcox, who just come in, he was also referred to as sporting director, by the way, Jason Wilcox, by Jim Ratcliffe, even though his title is technical director publicly. Maybe that's an indicator that Jason Wilcox has actually moved into that role now after Dan Ashworth's departure. He has held his hands up and admitted that those were mistakes. And I do remember at the time, I was one of the advocates for keeping Ten Hag. I'll hold my hands up to that, and I will say it again, because I thought the mitigating circumstances that he's talking about there, I thought they were legitimate. And obviously the club did as well. They also thought that they weren't sure about what the problem was, whether it was a problem with Ten Hag himself or structural problems at the club. What the actual problem was, so they decided to give Eric Ten Hag an extension and a bit more time, only to end up sacking him after, I think it was 9 games. I wanted to see Ten Hag get that extra chance. I will now sit here and say it was the wrong decision. It was. And Jim Ratcliffe has essentially said it was a wrong decision as well, but they were forced into a decision a little bit too quickly. And they didn't want to make a change straight away. I think he's right about the fan sentiment as well, by the way. I think there were polls that were done 70% in favor of keeping Eric Ten Hag at that point, given he did win the FA Cup. Maybe it was the wrong decision. It was. But that was, along with what I'll get to, I'll talk about Ruben Amorim in a little bit. I think he's pretty convinced, and one thing he has done is dispel talk over the future for Ruben Amorim, like a negative future. I think he believes in him. He then said about Ashworth, if we're talking about our industry, I think we just have to say chemistry. But I don't want to go down that road. With Eric, there was an emotional response after the cup final win. We get criticised for being unemotional at the moment with the cuts that are being made. And yet there was a bit of emotion in that decision around Ten Hag. Omar had only just arrived. Jason hadn't been with us very long. We didn't have many experts in play. I'm not an expert, and it was hard to extract him from the former management setup. So he obviously doesn't want to say too much about Dan Ashworth there. And there's probably something which is limiting him from saying something there. And I know we certainly haven't heard from Dan Ashworth over the course of the last few months since he's left United. But I think we just have to say chemistry. I think speculating, for me, I think the way that Jim Ratcliffe represents himself, it's very brutal. He wants to make decisions as soon as possible, as effective as possible. Doesn't really care about, feeling and this kind of thing. He's going to do what's best in his eyes for business. And I think after working with Dan Ashworth for a while, the established thought process here is that it didn't work. And I think Dan Ashworth was maybe a little bit too nice, in my opinion. So obviously that's now moved on. And I have said in previous episodes as well that I do feel that the group of people that are left, Ratcliffe, flanked by Omar Barada, Dave Brailsford's in there, Jason Wilcox, Christopher Vivell, who's in there, who now reports into Wilcox, I believe. All of these people seem to be on the same page. And I think that hiccup with Ashworth was a massively costly one. But he did essentially hold his hands up and say, Jim Ratcliffe, he did hold his hands up and say, I made a mistake. We made a mistake. And I think that is something that you do need to appreciate, I guess. I'm not saying you appreciate the United at the moment, given all the problems that they do have. But if you're trying to turn this football club around, some mistakes are going to happen, but some brutal decisions do need to be made. And I, for one, appreciate the honesty that he's given. I do. Maybe it's not the same case for everybody, but I do, and I'll say this again, I do actually believe that all this short-term pain that United are going through will be for the benefit in the future. And if they're saying we want to win the Premier League by 2028, and we want to win the Women's Super League by 2028, and we want to move into this new stadium by 2030 or in 5 years' time, they are all positive steps to move forward, and steps we could never have dreamed of a few years ago. It seemed, and even now, we can't really consider United even winning the Premier League at any point soon, let alone within 3 years. So I do think there's a United unit there now. And he said some things about Ruben Amorim. He was asked, Jim Ratcliffe was asked about who made the decision on Ruben Amorim. He said, Omar Barada, Jason Wilcox, and me. And obviously that's going to, again, come with some criticism about why did Ratcliffe name himself there? Can you imagine if he hadn't named himself there? Jim Ratcliffe is not convinced by Ruben Amorim. Look, we just work in it. The way that we work in media nowadays, or the way that the media world works, is there's always one way or another you can twist something. And the loudest voice or the most engaged voice will probably sway opinion one way or another. And I just go into things and think critically about what if he had said it differently and what would be the outcome from that. Because I know if he hadn't put his name to that decision on Ruben Amorim, people would say, oh, he's not actually convinced by Ruben Amorim, though, is he? Because he didn't hire him. He said, he was asked, do you like him? Yeah, I do, honestly. I really, really like Ruben. He's a thoughtful guy. Every time I go to the training ground, I speak to him. I sit down and have a cup of coffee with him and tell him where it's going wrong. And he tells me to F off. I like him, which I quite enjoyed. I thought that was a nice quote to demonstrate, really, that Ruben Amorim is incredibly individual, and he has his own vision, and he does not want to be told by anyone, let alone Jim Ratcliffe, who is the co-owner and is running the football operation. You can't tell me what to do. I know best. And United should be having specialists who, the last thing you want really is, I know this has happened with other clubs in the past, and I think lower down the ranks, but where people who are in high positions in football clubs will try to get involved with how the coach runs his team. He tells me to F off. I like him. I like that. I like that. And I think one of the positives that has come out of this is that Ruben Amorim has got backing. And look, United are in the lower reaches of the Premier League at the moment, and a public backing, even in that position, and public understanding of the problems that he has, will probably do Amorim a fair bit of good, and it will probably loosen the pressure on him over the course of the next few months, regardless of how it goes. I'm not saying that I thought in any sense that Ruben Amorim would lose his job before starting next season. I think this is a unit of people now that, after the hiccups with Ashworth and Ten Hag, has established that I think this is a group of people that are together. They're all moving towards a common goal. There's been a lot of noise about the cuts that have been made, but Ratcliffe has essentially said in this interview process as well that United are making these decisions now in order for the summer to start again and essentially start rebuilding. And a lot of it will depend on if United win the Europa League and get into the Champions League, how much money will come in from that. And will depend on player sales as well, in terms of how much money goes into what Ruben Amorim can spend in the summer. But it does seem that as though plans are being put in place in the long term to establish or re-establish Manchester United as a superpower in English football. It's hard to see that happening, to envision it happening. It is, and I'm not going to sit here and say that that's definitely going to happen, but I have more belief currently, even with United in 14th or 15th place, I have more belief currently that it will happen than I did a few years ago. Just because there's communication from internal people, from Jim Ratcliffe, from Omar Barada, that they want Manchester United to win, that they want Manchester United to be in a new stadium, which is one of the best stadiums in the world, the best stadium in England. There's conversations about how that stadium's going to have to be paid for. And yeah, well, look, they're completely legitimate questions to ask. Omar Barada has said that he can't essentially talk about it too much because the club's a PLC. So we just have to wait. But this is, look, I've been talking for 40 odd minutes here. So I think I'll get going now. But I think for me overall here, I prefer that he did it. Personally, I much prefer that Ruben Amorim, Sir Jim Ratcliffe has come out and actually spoken and been honest. I think you got to give him kudos for that. Some of the stuff he has said, I think he could have done without saying. The criticism is going to be inevitable, but I don't think he actually gives a damn about it. And at the end of the day, the most important thing that can come out of this is fundamental change, which will make Manchester United better in the long term, rather than managing your public image and public perception. The best thing for Manchester United in terms of public perception will be to start winning again. They're nowhere near it at the moment, but I think they're making some decisions, and have been making some decisions over the last year, which mean that eventually they will get back to that point. Anyway, this has been the Promised Land podcast from me, Scott Saunders, talking all things Manchester United. Please subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple for audio, and any other audio platform you may wish to use. And also leave a comment on the video, leave a comment on the audio uploads, give a 5-star review. I'm out of breath, actually. Give a 5-star review. I need to breathe more. 5-star review, and follow me on social media too, at @_Scott Saunders. Leave a comment and get back in touch with me about all this. How does this make you feel? I'd love to know. But until next time, everyone, busy day, busy times. Go back and check out my reaction to the club's new stadium announcement as well on Spotify and Apple, not on YouTube. But go over there and subscribe to that, as I may upload more episodes on there than I do on YouTube. But until next time, everyone, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. See you soon.